Zoraya enters a gala in her late mother's gown, only to be mistaken for a billionaire's date. As secrets unravel and emotions ignite, a single night threatens to rewrite both their lives forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the thin curtains of Zoraya King's small apartment. She stretched and sighed, already dreading another long day at the Grand Plaza Hotel, where she worked as a concierge. At 29, Zoraya had learned to expect little from life, especially from the wealthy guests she catered to every day. Another day, another dollar, she mumbled, as she pulled herself out of bed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Baby, did you remember to pay that bill for me? Things are tight this month." Zoraya closed her eyes briefly. Ever since her father had walked out when she was 8, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises, her mother had struggled. And Zoraya had learned early that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. "Already done, Mama, don't worry," she texted back, even though that payment had eaten into her art supply fund for the month. Her gaze drifted to the corner of her apartment where her easel stood. A half-finished portrait waited there, her true passion, her escape. Her drawings and paintings were the only place she felt truly free. 2 hours later, Zoraya stood behind the polished marble counter of the Grand Plaza Hotel, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hotel uniform pressed and perfect. "Good morning, Ms. King," said Marcus, the bellhop, with a wide smile. "Ready for another exciting day of serving the rich and famous?" Zoraya laughed. "As ready as I'll ever be." Just then, the hotel's revolving doors spun, and a man walked in who made every head turn. Tall, with broad shoulders and a confident stride, he wore an obviously expensive suit that fit him like it had been painted on. "That's Julian Crestwood," Marcus whispered. "Millionaire, tech company or something. Stays in the penthouse whenever he's in town." Julian Crestwood approached the concierge desk, his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, focused on his phone. "I need dinner reservations at LeBlanc tonight, 8 o'clock, he said without looking up. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crestwood," Zoraya replied calmly. "LeBlanc is fully booked tonight. There's a charity event." He finally looked up, clearly not used to hearing the word no. For a moment, he just stared at her, and Zoraya felt something strange pass between them, a flicker of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met. "I can get you into Azura instead," she offered. "The chef there is actually better, though don't tell anyone I said that." A slight smile touched his lips. "Is that so? I wouldn't steer you wrong, Mr. Crestwood." He studied her name tag. "Zoraya," he said, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. "Make it happen." As he walked away, Zoraya shook her head. Typical rich guy, handsome, sure, but also cold and entitled. She'd met 100 like him. What she didn't know was that Julian Crestwood had just received an invitation that morning, an invitation that would soon change both their lives. In his penthouse suite, Julian stared at the embossed invitation on his coffee table like it was a ticking bomb. "The Westover Foundation Annual Gala," it read, "honoring Vanessa Westover and her engagement to Congressman David Mitchell." Vanessa, his ex-fiancée, the woman who had left him for a rising political star 6 months ago, claiming Julian was too consumed by his work and emotionally unavailable. His phone rang. It was his best friend, Alex. "Did you get it?" Alex asked without preamble. "The invitation, yeah. Are you going?" Julian ran a hand through his dark hair. "She's obviously inviting me just to rub her new engagement in my face. So don't go. And let her think I'm hiding? That I care?" Julian's jaw tightened. "No way." "Then show up with someone who'll make her regret walking away," Alex suggested. "Someone stunning, someone unexpected." Julian's mind flashed to the concierge downstairs, those intelligent eyes, that quiet confidence, and something else, a resemblance he couldn't quite place. "I might have an idea," he said slowly, "but I'll need your help." The next day, Zoraya was surprised when Marcus approached her at the end of her shift. "Hey, remember my cousin Tasha? She works for that staffing agency," Marcus said. "She called me with a weird request. Some rich client wants to hire you for a night." Zoraya's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "Not like that," Marcus quickly added. "He needs a date for some fancy party. One night just for appearances. He's offering $5,000. $5,000? Zoraya repeated, stunned. That kind of money could help her mother catch up on bills and give Zoraya enough left over to take that art class she'd been eyeing. "Who is it?" Marcus shrugged. "Tasha wouldn't say, but it's tomorrow night, and apparently he's desperate." Zoraya bit her lip. It sounded crazy, but also Simple. One night pretending to be some rich guy's girlfriend for $5,000. Tell Tasha I want to meet him first, she decided. And if anything feels off, the deal's off. That evening, Zariah found herself sitting in an upscale cafe, nervously checking her watch. The mysterious client was already 10 minutes late. Sorry to keep you waiting. She looked up to find Julian Crestwood standing at her table, looking even more handsome in casual clothes than he had in his suit. You? She gasped. He slid into the seat across from her. Is that disappointment I hear? Surprise, she corrected. When Marcus mentioned a rich client, I didn't think it would be you. So your friend didn't tell you who I was, Julian said. But he explained what I need? Zariah nodded, still processing. A date for some event. But why me? You could have anyone. Something flickered in Julian's eyes, a shadow quickly hidden. I need someone real. Someone smart. Someone who won't embarrass me or try to make this more than it is. He leaned forward. I've seen how you handle difficult guests at the hotel. You're calm, composed, and you don't take any nonsense. $5,000 for one night, Zariah stated, making sure she understood. Just to pretend to be your girlfriend. Exactly. We attend the gala, you look beautiful, we make everyone believe we're together, and then we go our separate ways. What's the catch? A smile touched Julian's lips. Smart question. The event is the Westover Foundation Gala. My ex-fiancée, Vanessa Westover, will be there with her new fiancé. She sent me an invitation to flaunt her happiness in my face. So I'm supposed to help you make her jealous? Zariah asked, frowning. Not jealous. I just refuse to show up alone and let her think I'm still pining for her. His blue eyes held Zariah's gaze. This is business, Ms. King. Cold, simple business. Zariah thought of her mother's mounting bills, of her own dreams of taking advanced art classes. $5,000 for one night of pretend. I'll need a dress, she said finally. Julian's face broke into a genuine smile, the first she'd seen from him. I'll have a selection delivered to your apartment tomorrow morning. Choose whatever you like. How do you know where I live? He handed her a business card. I don't. Text your address to this number. My assistant will handle everything. As Zariah took the card, their fingers brushed, and she felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. For a moment, something unreadable passed across Julian's face, that same strange recognition she'd noticed at the hotel. Is there something on my face? She asked, self-conscious. Julian shook his head as if clearing away a thought. No, it's nothing. He stood up. Tomorrow night, then. My driver will pick you up at 7. As he walked away, Zariah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this arrangement than Julian was telling her. But $5,000 was $5,000, and really, how complicated could one night be? The next morning, Zariah woke to a knock on her door. Outside stood a woman with a clipboard and 3 men carrying garment bags. Ms. King, I'm Sophia, Mr. Crestwood's assistant. May we come in? Before Zariah could fully process what was happening, her small living room was filled with racks of designer dresses, shoes, and jewelry. Mr. Crestwood wanted to ensure you had options, Sophia explained coolly. Zariah ran her hand over a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. This is a lot. He also scheduled a hair and makeup team to arrive at 5 this evening, Sophia continued, checking her tablet. Now, do you have any questions about tonight? Zariah thought for a moment. Yes. What exactly is my backstory? How did Julian and I meet? People will ask. Sophia nodded approvingly. Good question. Mr. Crestwood suggested keeping it simple and close to the truth. You met at the hotel where you work. After several encounters, he was impressed by your intelligence and asked you to dinner. And now we're dating, Zariah finished. Exactly. Keep details vague but believable. The goal is to appear genuinely coupled without inviting too many questions. Sophia checked her watch. I must go. Mr. Crestwood has a busy day. Choose whatever you like from these options. They're all yours to keep. After Sophia left, Zariah sat on her sofa, surrounded by more luxury than she'd ever seen up close. This whole situation felt surreal. For a brief moment, she considered calling the whole thing off, but then her phone buzzed with another text from her mother. The hospital called about payment again. Zariah's resolve hardened. One night, $5,000. She could do this. She stood and began examining the dresses, eventually pulling out a deep emerald green gown with a subtle shimmer. It was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without trying too hard. As she held it against herself in the mirror, she could almost imagine belonging in Julian Crestwood's world, just for one night. At precisely 7 o'clock, A sleek black car pulled up outside Zoraya's apartment building. The driver opened the door for her, and she slid into the back seat, careful not to wrinkle her dress. To her surprise, Julian wasn't inside. Instead, there was a small velvet box on the seat with a note. "Meeting you at the gala. Thought these might complete your look." Inside the box was a pair of teardrop emerald earrings that matched her dress perfectly. Zoraya hesitated, then put them on. $5,000 and borrowed jewelry. She could handle this. 30 minutes later, the car pulled up to a grand hotel lit up like a Christmas tree. Red carpet stretched from the street to the entrance, where photographers snapped pictures of arriving guests. "Mr. Crestwood said to tell you he'll meet you at the top of the stairs," the driver said as he opened her door. Taking a deep breath, Zoraya stepped out of the car. A few heads turned her way, probably wondering who she was, but no cameras flashed for her. She made her way up the carpeted stairs, her heart pounding, and there he was. Julian Crestwood stood at the top of the stairs in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine. When he saw her, something changed in his expression, surprise followed by something deeper that Zoraya couldn't name. "You look," he started, then seemed at a loss for words. "Is something wrong?" Zoraya asked, suddenly worried she'd chosen poorly. Julian shook his head slowly. "No, you look perfect." He offered his arm. "Ready to put on a show?" As Zoraya took his arm, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the glass doors of the hotel. They looked good together, like they belonged together. For just a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the fantasy. "Lead the way, Mr. Crestwood," she said, with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Julian," he corrected, leaning close to her ear. "Tonight I'm Julian to you." And with that, he led her through the doors and into a world of crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and the kind of people who made $5,000 in interest before breakfast. Zoraya felt a flutter of nervousness. This was it. One night, one truth to find, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Westover Foundation Gala was exactly as lavish as Zoraya had imagined. The grand ballroom glittered with thousands of tiny lights, making the crystal chandeliers sparkle like stars. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked too pretty to eat. "Stay close," Julian murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back. "And remember, you're not impressed by any of this." Zoraya raised an eyebrow. "That's part of our story?" "No," he said with a slight smile. "That's just you, the concierge who wasn't impressed by Julian Crestwood." Before she could respond, an older gentleman approached them, hand extended. "Julian didn't think you'd show tonight," the man said, giving Julian a hearty handshake before turning curious eyes to Zoraya. "Wouldn't miss it, Senator," Julian replied smoothly. "May I introduce Zoraya King? Zoraya, this is Senator Williams." "Lovely to meet you," Zoraya said, extending her hand with a warm smile. The senator seemed charmed. "The pleasure is mine. I must say, Julian, you've been keeping this beautiful woman a secret. How did you two meet?" Julian glanced at Zoraya, something playful in his eyes. "She put me in my place at her hotel. I was immediately intrigued. He was demanding the impossible," Zoraya added, surprised by how easily the words came. "I offered him something better instead." The senator laughed. "A woman who knows her mind. Good for you, Julian." As the senator moved on, Julian leaned closer to Zoraya. "That was perfect. Natural." "I just told the truth," she replied. "Partly, anyway." Over the next hour, they moved through the crowd together. Julian introduced her to business associates, politicians, and socialites, whose names Zoraya knew she'd never remember. To her surprise, playing the role of Julian's date wasn't as difficult as she'd feared. He stayed close, his hand often finding hers or resting lightly on her back. When he spoke to others, he frequently glanced at her, including her in conversations, asking for her opinion. If Zoraya didn't know better, she might have thought it was real. "There she is," Julian said suddenly, his body tensing. "Vanessa." Zoraya followed his gaze to a stunning blonde woman in a white gown. On her arm was a handsome man with silver-streaked hair and a political smile, the kind practiced in front of mirrors until it looked natural. "Your ex-fiancé?" Zoraya asked quietly. Julian nodded, his jaw tight. "And her fiancé, Congressman Mitchell." Zoraya studied the woman for a moment. Vanessa Westover was classically beautiful, with the kind of polished perfection that came from a lifetime of privilege. But there was something cold in her smile, calculating in her eyes as they swept the room. Those eyes eventually landed on Julian, widening slightly in surprise. Clearly, she hadn't expected him to actually attend. Then her gaze shifted to Zoraya, and her perfect smile faltered for just a moment. "She's coming this way," Zariah whispered. "What's our play?" Julian's hand tightened around hers. "Just be yourself. That's enough to make anyone jealous." Before Zariah could process that unexpected compliment, Vanessa was upon them, her fiancé in tow. "Julian," she said, air-kissing his cheek, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," Julian replied, his voice perfectly pleasant. "Congratulations on your engagement, Vanessa. Congressman, good to see you again." The men shook hands with practiced civility. "And who is this?" Vanessa asked, her eyes scanning Zariah with barely disguised curiosity. "This is Zariah King," Julian said, his voice warming as he looked at her. "Zariah, this is Vanessa Westover and Congressman David Mitchell. Lovely to meet you both," Zariah said with a genuine smile. She'd dealt with enough wealthy guests at the hotel to know how to handle this situation. "The foundation is doing amazing work. I was just reading about your education initiative in underserved communities." Vanessa seemed taken aback, clearly not expecting substance from Julian's date. "How you follow our work? I grew up in one of those communities," Zariah said simply. "Education was my way out. So yes, I follow organizations that help kids like I was." The congressman stepped forward, suddenly interested. "Which neighborhood, if you don't mind my asking?" "Southside Atlanta," Zariah replied. "Not the part that's been gentrified." "I'm heading there next month for a campaign stop," he said. "Perhaps you could share some insights about the area's needs." Zariah felt Julian's surprise beside her, but she kept her focus on the congressman. "I'd be happy to. The community center on Maple Street would be a good place to start. They're doing incredible work with limited resources." As they continued talking, Zariah became aware that Vanessa was studying her with increasing intensity. Finally, the blonde woman interrupted. "How did you and Julian meet? He usually doesn't date." "Well, smart women?" Zariah supplied with a sweet smile that took the sting out of her words. Julian laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise Vanessa. "She's right. I've definitely upgraded." Vanessa's perfect smile tightened. "I just meant someone outside our usual social circle. The best things in life often come from unexpected places," Julian said, his arm sliding around Zariah's waist in a gesture that felt oddly protective. "If you'll excuse us, I believe they're about to start dinner." As they walked away, Zariah could feel Vanessa's eyes boring into her back. "That went well," Julian murmured. "She definitely wasn't expecting you to show up with someone like me," Zariah replied. Julian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Someone intelligent, beautiful, and genuine?" No, she probably wasn't. The intensity in his blue eyes made Zariah's heart skip. For a moment, she forgot this was all pretend. "Oh, you're very good at this," she said softly. Something passed across his face, a shadow of regret. "Sometimes I'm not sure what's real anymore." Before she could ask what he meant, they were ushered to their table for dinner. Throughout the meal, Zariah found herself genuinely enjoying Julian's company. When he wasn't putting on a show for the business world, he was surprisingly thoughtful and even funny. He asked questions about her art and actually listened to her answers. He seemed genuinely interested in her life, her dreams. "So why hotel work?" he asked as they finished their dessert. "If art is your passion, bills don't pay themselves," Zariah replied with a shrug. "My mother has health issues, and after my father left, someone had to be the responsible one." Julian's expression sobered. "I'm sorry. That must have been difficult." "Life is difficult for most people," she said simply. "We just do what we have to do." He studied her for a long moment. "You're different from anyone I've met." "That's not saying much. Your world seems pretty uniform." Julian laughed, shaking his head. "Touché." The conversation was interrupted when a distinguished older man stopped by their table. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Zariah. "I couldn't help noticing your discussion of techniques with the gentleman at the next table. Are you an artist?" Zariah looked up in surprise. "Yes, I am, though not professionally." "Yet," Julian added, and the certainty in his voice made Zariah glance at him. The man introduced himself as Harold Winters, and Zariah nearly gasped. Harold Winters was one of the most respected art critics in the country. "I dabble in portraiture mostly," she explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "She's being modest," Julian interjected. "She captures people's essence in a way I've rarely seen." Zariah stared at him. "How would he know that?" "Do you have any work with you, Mr. Winters asked. "Just on my phone," Zariah admitted, pulling out her phone and scrolling to photos of her recent pieces. Mr. Winters studied them intently, occasionally zooming in on details. "These are remarkable. The emotional depth, the technical skill. Have you had formal training? Some community college courses, Zariah said. I'd love to study more, but financial realities get in the way, Mr. Winters finished for her. He handed her a business card. I'm curating a showcase of emerging artists next month. I'd like to include your work. Call my office. As he walked away, Zariah sat in stunned silence. Did that just happen? She finally whispered. Julian was smiling at her, a genuine smile that transformed his face. He recognized your talent, as he should. But how did you know about my work, about capturing essence? For a moment, Julian looked caught off guard. Then he shrugged. Just a guess based on how you observe people. You see more than most. Zariah wasn't entirely convinced, but before she could press further, the lights dimmed, and Vanessa took the stage to make a speech about the Foundation's work. As Vanessa spoke eloquently about helping disadvantaged children, Zariah couldn't help but compare the poised, perfect woman on stage with the one who had looked at her with such disdain earlier. Which was the real Vanessa? She glanced at Julian and found him watching her instead of his ex. There was something in his eyes she couldn't read, something almost sad. What? She whispered. He shook his head slightly. Nothing. After the speech, a band began to play, and couples moved to the dance floor. Julian stood and offered his hand to Zariah. Shall we? Zariah hesitated. I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer. Just follow my lead, he said softly. On the dance floor, Julian pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had taken lessons since childhood. Relax, he murmured when he felt her tension. You're doing fine. Gradually, Zariah began to feel more comfortable, allowing herself to be guided by his movements. The music, the lights, the warmth of his hand on her waist, it all combined to create a dreamlike atmosphere. Everyone's watching us, she said quietly. Let them watch, Julian replied, his eyes never leaving her face. They're just wondering how I got so lucky. Zariah laughed softly. You're very convincing, you know. If I didn't know better, I might think you meant all these nice things you're saying. Something flickered in his eyes. What if I do? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Zariah felt her heart beating faster. This was dangerous territory, forgetting that this was all pretend, that he had hired her for a role. Before she could respond, Julian suddenly stiffened. Zariah followed his gaze and saw Vanessa watching them from the edge of the dance floor, her expression unreadable. She's still watching you, Zariah observed. Julian's attention snapped back to her. I'm not concerned about Vanessa anymore. No? Then why are we still putting on this show? He pulled her slightly closer. Maybe I'm enjoying it. The band transitioned to a slower song, and Julian's hand spread wider on her back, drawing her nearer until she could feel the warmth of his body against hers. Zariah told herself this was still part of the act, but as they swayed together, his cheek occasionally brushing her temple, it became harder to remember where the pretense ended and reality began. You smell like lavender, he said, his voice low near her ear. It's just shampoo, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. It reminds me of someone, he murmured almost to himself. Zariah pulled back slightly to look at him. Who? For a moment Julian looked like he might answer. Then he shook his head. It doesn't matter. The song ended, and Julian reluctantly stepped back. Would you like some air? There's a garden terrace. Zariah nodded, grateful for the chance to clear her head. This evening was becoming too confusing, the lines too blurred. The terrace was quieter, with only a few other guests enjoying the cool night air. Fairy lights twinkled in the carefully manicured shrubs, and the city skyline glittered beyond. Beautiful, isn't it? Julian said, coming to stand beside her at the stone balustrade. Yes, Zariah agreed, grateful for the simple topic. Though I bet the view from your penthouse is even better. Julian chuckled. Different, not better. Sometimes I think I've spent too much time looking at skylines and not enough time looking at what's right in front of me. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Zariah, there's something I should tell you. There you are, a voice interrupted. They turned to see a man around Julian's age approaching, slightly unsteady from too much champagne. Julian, you old dog, aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion? Zariah, this is Robert Chen, my VP of Operations, Julian said, his jaw tight with obvious annoyance at the interruption. Robert, this is Zariah King. Robert grinned, looking Zariah up and down in a way that made her uncomfortable. Well, Vanessa's certainly taking notice. Smart move, Julian. She's definitely your type. Almost an exact match for... Robert, Julian cut him off sharply. I think your wife is looking for you. Robert held up his hands in surrender. Just saying what everyone's thinking. Nice to meet you, Zariah. Don't let this one push you away like he does everyone else. As Robert stumbled back inside, Zariah turned to Julian, confusion and the first tendrils of hurt creeping into her heart. What did he mean? Almost an exact match. Match for who? Julian's face had closed off, the warmth from their dance gone. Robert's drunk. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Julian, Zariah pressed, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Why did you really choose me for tonight? For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. We should head back inside. No, Zariah stood her ground. I want the truth. Now. Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she hadn't seen from him before. It's complicated. Try me. He sighed deeply. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone I lost. The words hit Zariah like a slap. She stepped back, suddenly seeing the evening in a completely different light. So I'm what? A stand-in? A replacement for someone else? That's not what I... Is that why you picked me? Because I look like her? Zariah's voice rose slightly. Who was she, Julian? An ex, the one who got away? Julian reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Zariah, please, let me explain. I think you just did. She felt foolish now, for enjoying his company, for feeling special when he looked at her, for thinking, even for a moment, that his interest might be genuine. I was just a prop in your game with Vanessa, a stand-in for someone else. Just then, the glass doors to the terrace opened and several guests spilled out, laughing and talking loudly. Julian leaned closer, lowering his voice. Can we please discuss this somewhere private? There's nothing to discuss, Zariah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I did what you paid me to do. The night's almost over. Let's just finish it and be done. Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked back into the ballroom, her head high despite the ache in her chest. She had let herself forget, just for a while, that this was all pretend, that she was an employee, not a date, that a man like Julian Crestwood would never truly be interested in someone like her. As she made her way through the crowded room, she heard someone call her name. Turning, she saw Mr. Winters, the art critic, waving her over to a small group. Miss King, I was just telling my colleagues about your remarkable talent. Do you have time to join us? Zariah hesitated, glancing back to see Julian making his way toward her through the crowd. She made a quick decision. I'd be delighted, she said, stepping into the circle and away from Julian. For the next half hour, she immersed herself in conversation about art techniques and inspirations, trying to ignore the feeling of Julian's eyes on her from across the room. This was her moment, a potential break for her artistic career. She wouldn't let her foolish feelings for a man who saw her as a replacement ruin it. Your perspective is so refreshing, one of the gallery owners in the group told her. So authentic. You must join us for the gallery opening next week. As they exchanged contact information, Zariah became aware of a commotion near the main entrance. She looked up to see Vanessa engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Julian. Trouble in paradise? Mr. Winters murmured, following her gaze. They have history, Zariah said simply. Don't we all? He replied with a knowing smile. The question is whether we let it define our future. Those words stuck with Zariah as she watched Julian and Vanessa from across the room. Their body language spoke volumes. Vanessa leaning in, one hand on Julian's arm, while he stood stiffly, maintaining distance. What was their conversation about? And why did Zariah care so much? She excused herself from the group and made her way toward the ladies' room, needing a moment alone to collect her thoughts. As she passed near Julian and Vanessa, she couldn't help overhearing fragments of their conversation. She's lovely, Julian, Vanessa was saying, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But we both know why you brought her. She looks just like... Don't, Julian cut her off, his voice hard. You don't get to talk about that. Still so sensitive, Vanessa sighed. This is why we never worked, Julian. You're still living in the past, using this poor girl as a stand-in. Zariah froze, the words confirming her worst fears. She must have made a sound because both Julian and Vanessa turned to look at her. Zariah, Julian said, stepping toward her, his eyes filled with something that looked like regret. But Zariah had heard enough. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit, ignoring Julian calling her name. She couldn't bear to hear whatever explanation he might offer. The truth was clear enough. She had been a replacement all along, a shadow of someone else, just a stand-in. Outside, she instructed the valet to call her a taxi, refusing to wait for Julian's driver. As she stood on the steps of the hotel, The cool night air a sharp contrast to the warmth of the ballroom. She felt oddly calm despite the hurt swirling inside her. $5,000. That's what tonight was worth. A business transaction, nothing more. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Julian approaching, his expression troubled. "Zariah, please let me take you home." "I've called a taxi," she said, her voice steady. "Our arrangement is complete, Mr. Crestwood. You got what you paid for. What you heard. It's not what you think," he insisted. "Isn't it?" Zariah looked at him directly. "You chose me because I remind you of someone. That's the truth, isn't it?" Julian's silence was answer enough. "Who was she?" Zariah asked, surprising herself with the question. For a long moment, Julian said nothing. Then, quietly, "My sister. You remind me of my sister." The admission caught Zariah off guard. "Your sister? She died 10 years ago," Julian continued, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "You have her smile, her way of seeing through people's masks." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't realize it until that first day at the hotel. And I don't know what I thought." Zariah didn't know what to say. This wasn't what she had expected. Not at all. A taxi pulled up to the curb. "That's my ride," she said, still processing his revelation. Julian reached for her hand. "Zariah, I'm sorry. I should have told you." She gently pulled her hand away. "Yes, you should have." As she turned to go, Julian spoke again. "The offer from Harold Winters, that had nothing to do with me. That was all you, all your talent." Zariah nodded, wanting to believe him. "Good night, Julian." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Zariah looked back to see Julian standing alone on the steps of the hotel, watching her leave. Something inside her wanted to tell the driver to stop, to go back and hear Julian out. But what would be the point? Tonight had been a job, not a date. A fantasy, not reality. And yet, as the taxi merged into the late-night traffic, Zariah couldn't stop thinking about the way Julian had looked at her when they danced. The genuine interest in his eyes when she talked about her art, the warmth of his hand in hers, or the sadness in his voice when he spoke of his sister. One night, one truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the gala, Zariah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently. She squinted at the screen. 5 missed calls from an unknown number and a text message that simply read, "Please call me, Julian." She set the phone down without responding. Last night felt like a dream. The glamour, the dancing, the brief fantasy that someone like Julian Crestwood might actually see her, the real her, and then the painful awakening to reality. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother. "Baby, how was your big date? You didn't call me last night." Zariah sighed. She hadn't told her mother the truth about the arrangement with Julian, only that she had been invited to a fancy gala. "It was fine, Mama. Just tired when I got home." "Well, I want to hear all about it. Come for Sunday dinner tomorrow." "I'll be there," Zariah promised. After hanging up, she forced herself out of bed. The emerald dress lay draped over a chair, a glittering reminder of a night that wasn't real. Next to it was her purse, where she'd placed the small envelope Julian's driver had handed her before the gala, containing a check for $5,000. A clean business transaction. That's all it had been. So why did her chest ache when she thought about never seeing Julian again? She shook off the feeling and headed to the shower. Today was her day off, and she had promised herself she would work on her paintings. Art had always been her escape, her true voice. Now with Harold Winters' business card sitting on her kitchen counter, it might finally become something more. Across town, Julian sat in his penthouse office, staring at his phone. Zariah hadn't answered his calls or texts. Not that he blamed her. "You look terrible," said a voice from the doorway. Julian looked up to see his best friend, Alex, leaning against the doorframe. "Thanks for the update," Julian replied dryly. Alex came in and sat across from him. "I take it the gala didn't go as planned." Julian ran a hand over his face. "It went exactly as planned, until it didn't." "What happened?" "She found out why I chose her." Alex winced. "You told her about the resemblance to Lily?" "Not exactly." Julian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Vanessa mentioned it, and Robert, in his usual tactful way, practically announced it to anyone listening." "Ouch." "Yeah." Julian turned back to his friend. "The thing is, Alex, it started out as that. The resemblance to Lily caught my attention, but last night with Zariah, it became something else, something real." Alex studied him for a moment. "I haven't seen you like this since, well, ever." "She's different," Julian said simply. "She sees through all the bullshit. She's talented, smart, genuine. And now she thinks she was just a replacement for my dead sister. Did you explain? I tried. She wouldn't listen. Julian picked up his phone again, checking for messages that weren't there. And why should she? I hired her to play a part, then got upset when she didn't want to keep pretending. So what are you going to do? Julian's jaw set with determination. I'm going to make it right. 2 days later, Zariah was back at work at the Grand Plaza Hotel. She had successfully avoided thinking about Julian Crestwood, mostly by throwing herself into preparations for the showcase Harold Winters had invited her to join. She had selected 3 of her best portraits to display and was working on a 4th in her spare time. Someone's in a mood, Marcus commented as they stood behind the concierge desk. That fancy party not go well? Zariah forced a smile. It was fine, just busy with my art stuff. Uh-huh, Marcus said, clearly not believing her. Well, heads up. Mr. Grumpy from 1502 is headed this way and he does not look happy. Zariah looked up to see an elderly man approaching the desk with a scowl. Mr. Peterson had been staying at the hotel for a week and had complained about everything from the temperature of his coffee to the firmness of his mattress. Good morning, Mr. Peterson, Zariah said with her best professional smile. How can I help you today? 20 minutes later, after arranging for maintenance to check the suspiciously noisy air conditioning in Mr. Peterson's room for the 3rd time, Zariah was ready for her break. She headed to the staff room, only to be intercepted by Sophia, Julian's assistant. Ms. King, Sophia said coolly, do you have a moment? Zariah's heart skipped despite herself. Is something wrong with the payment? The payment went through fine, Sophia replied. This is about something else. Mr. Crestwood would like to speak with you. I'm working, Zariah said flatly. He's aware. He's asked if you would meet him after your shift ends. Sophia held out a small envelope. All the details are in here. Zariah hesitated, then took the envelope. I'll think about it. Sophia nodded once. He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you that he understands if you don't come, but he hopes you will. With that, she turned and walked away. Zariah waited until she was alone in the staff room to open the envelope. Inside was a note written in a strong, angular hand. Zariah, I owe you an explanation. No strings, no expectations. Just the truth you deserve. I'll be at the Riverside Cafe at 6 p.m. today. I hope you'll join me, but I understand if you don't. Julian Zariah folded the note and put it back in the envelope. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to put the entire bizarre episode behind her. But another part, a stronger part, wanted answers. When her shift ended at 5:30, she found herself heading toward Riverside Cafe instead of home. The cafe was small and unpretentious, nothing like the upscale establishments Zariah would have expected Julian to frequent. It overlooked the river, with a patio that offered a peaceful view of the water. Julian was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He wasn't wearing his usual designer suit, but jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked more approachable this way, more human. He stood when he saw her. You came. I almost didn't, she admitted, taking the seat across from him. I'm glad you did. He pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. I remembered you take it with cream, no sugar. The fact that he'd noticed such a small detail caught her off guard. Thanks. For a moment, neither spoke. Julian seemed to be gathering his thoughts, and Zariah was content to let him struggle. Finally, he began. I owe you an apology and an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Zariah said. We had a business arrangement. It's done. Is that really how you see it? Julian asked, his blue eyes searching hers. Zariah looked away. How else should I see it? Julian sighed. Fair enough, but I'd still like to explain if you'll let me. She nodded once, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. My sister Lily died 10 years ago, Julian began, his voice low. She was 19. Car accident. Despite her resolve to remain detached, Zariah felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry, Julian nodded. She was the best of us. Kind, creative, saw the good in everyone. After she died, something in our family broke. My parents retreated into their grief. I threw myself into building the business, becoming successful, as if that could somehow fill the hole she left. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. When I first saw you at the hotel, something about your smile reminded me of her. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, just a flash of recognition, that same genuineness she had. So you hired me because I reminded you of your sister, Zariah stated, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. At first, yes, Julian admitted. I don't know what I thought, that having you there would make the night easier somehow. But then I got to know you and it became about you. not any resemblance to Lily. Zariah wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. How convenient. Julian leaned forward. Zariah, I've dated plenty of women who look nothing like my sister. I've never once sought out someone because they reminded me of her, until you. And it wasn't about your appearance. It was something in your spirit, your authenticity. So I'm supposed to feel flattered? Zariah challenged. No, Julian said firmly. You're supposed to understand that while the resemblance to Lily might have been what first caught my attention, it's not why I couldn't take my eyes off you all night. It's not why I called you afterward. And it's certainly not why I'm sitting here now. His intensity made Zariah's heart beat faster. Then why are you here? Because I can't stop thinking about you, he said simply. The real you. The artist with big dreams, the daughter taking care of her mother, the woman who put me in my place at the hotel. I want to know that woman better. Zariah sat back, studying him. There seemed to be genuine emotion in his eyes. But how could she trust it? How could she trust him? I'm not sure that's a good idea, she said finally. Julian nodded, as if he'd expected this response. I understand, but before you decide, there's something else you should know. He reached down beside his chair and lifted up a portfolio case. I did some research on Harold Winters's showcase. It's a big opportunity. Gallery owners, collectors, they'll all be there. But the submission fee is steep. He placed the portfolio on the table and slid it toward her. I took the liberty of preparing the application materials. The fee is covered. Zariah stared at the portfolio, then back at Julian. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, he insisted. It's an investment in an artist I believe in. You can pay me back when you sell your first painting. And if I don't want to accept, then don't, Julian said. Tear it up. Find another way. I know you will because you're determined, but I'm hoping you'll see this for what it is. My way of trying to make things right. Zariah's fingers hovered over the portfolio. The showcase was a real opportunity, one she might not get again. But accepting Julian's help felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she should walk through. Why do you care so much? She asked softly. Julian's expression was open, vulnerable, in a way she hadn't seen before. Because that night at the gala, for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not the CEO, not the ex-fiancé, not the guy who lost his sister. Just me. And that was because of you. The sincerity in his voice was hard to dismiss. Zariah found herself wanting to believe him, despite her better judgment. I need time to think, she said finally. Julian nodded. Take all the time you need. My number's in there, if you want to talk. As Zariah stood to leave, portfolio in hand, Julian remained seated. For what it's worth, he said, Vanessa called me yesterday. Zariah paused. Oh? She wanted to try again. Said seeing me at the gala made her realize she'd made a mistake. And what did you tell her? Zariah asked, trying to sound casual. Julian's eyes held hers. I told her I'd met someone who reminded me what it feels like to be real with another person, and I wasn't going back to pretending. Zariah felt a rush of emotion she wasn't prepared for. Without another word, she turned and left the cafe, the weight of the portfolio in her hands, nothing compared to the weight of Julian's words on her heart. For the next week, Zariah threw herself into preparing for the showcase. She had decided to use the application materials Julian had prepared, not because she forgave him, she told herself, but because it would be foolish to pass up the opportunity. Harold Winters had been impressed with her submission and had selected all 3 of her portraits for display. The showcase was just 2 weeks away, and Zariah was working feverishly to complete a 4th piece, a portrait of her mother, capturing the quiet strength and dignity that had sustained them both through difficult years. She hadn't contacted Julian, though she'd found herself reaching for her phone more than once. What would she even say? That she was flattered but still hurt? That she was confused by her own feelings? That despite everything, she missed talking to him? It was easier to focus on her art. On Sunday evening, she visited her mother for dinner, as promised. They sat in the small kitchen of the apartment where Zariah had grown up, eating her mother's famous pot roast. You're quiet tonight, her mother observed. Still thinking about that man from the gala. Zariah looked up in surprise. How did you know? Her mother smiled knowingly. Baby, I raised you. I know when something's on your mind, and you've barely mentioned this big fancy date you went on, which tells me there's a story there. Zariah sighed and told her mother everything, the arrangement, the gala, Julian's revelation about his sister, and his subsequent attempt to make amends. Her mother listened without interrupting, her wise eyes taking in every detail. When Zariah finished, she reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. You know what I think? She said. I think sometimes people come into our lives for the strangest reasons, but it's what happens next that matters. What do you mean? This man, he may have noticed you for one reason, but he's staying for another. The question is, do you want him to stay? Zariah considered this. I don't know, Mama. He lives in a different world. Worlds change, her mother said simply. People change them. After dinner, as Zariah was helping with the dishes, there was a knock at the door. Her mother went to answer it and returned with a strange expression on her face. There's a delivery for you, she said. In the living room stood a delivery man holding a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. Zariah King, he asked. That's me. Sign here, please. After he left, Zariah carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a framed photograph, an old one showing a teenage girl with a bright smile, sitting at an easel with a paintbrush in hand. A note was attached. This is Lily. She loved art too. I thought you should know who she was, since she's part of this story. But she's not the reason I can't stop thinking about you, that's all you. Julie and Zariah stared at the photograph. The girl did have a similar smile to her own. Open, genuine, but they looked nothing alike otherwise. Lily was fair where Zariah was dark, delicate where Zariah was strong. She seems like she was a lovely girl, her mother said, looking over Zariah's shoulder. She does, Zariah agreed softly. What are you going to do? Her mother asked. Zariah touched the frame lightly. I don't know yet, but for the first time since the night of the gala, she felt the wall around her heart beginning to crack. The next morning, Zariah arrived at work to find Marcus practically bouncing with excitement. You are not going to believe who just checked in, he said as soon as she reached the concierge desk. Brad Pitt? Zariah guessed with a smile. Better, at least more relevant to you. Marcus gestured discreetly toward the lobby seating area. Julian Crestwood. Zariah's head snapped up. Sure enough, Julian was sitting in one of the lobby chairs, reading a newspaper. He was back in his business attire. Impeccable suit, polished shoes. But something was different about him. He seemed calmer somehow. What is he doing here? She whispered. He lives in this city. He doesn't need a hotel room. Marcus shrugged. He specifically asked for our lowest floor, smallest room, said something about a change of perspective, and he asked if you were working today. Zariah's heart pounded. What did you tell him? The truth, that you'd be here until 6. Marcus grinned. Come on, Zariah. The man is clearly trying to get your attention. Are you going to make him sit there all day? Yes, she said firmly. I'm working. But throughout the morning she was acutely aware of Julian's presence. He remained in the lobby, occasionally speaking on his phone, but mostly just waiting, watching without being obvious about it, giving her space while making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. By lunchtime, Zariah's curiosity got the better of her. During her break, she approached him. What are you doing, Julian? He looked up from his newspaper, a smile spreading across his face. Having an overpriced coffee and catching up on the news. You know what I mean. Why are you staying at this hotel when you have a penthouse 20 minutes away? Julian set the paper aside. I'm trying to see the world from your perspective, starting with where you work. Zariah crossed her arms. And how's that going for you? Enlightening, he admitted. I've been a guest at luxury hotels all over the world, but I've never really paid attention to the people who make them run. I've watched you handle 3 demanding guests this morning, with more patience than I've shown in board meetings with people who make millions. His observation was unexpectedly perceptive. It's my job. It's more than that, Julian said. It's who you are. You see people, really see them, even when they're being difficult. Zariah didn't know how to respond to that. I have to get back to work, Julian nodded. I'll be here, room 302 if you want to talk later. Throughout the afternoon, Zariah tried to focus on her job, but her thoughts kept drifting to Julian. What game was he playing? Or was it not a game at all? At the end of her shift, she found herself walking to the elevator, pressing the button for the 3rd floor before she could change her mind. Room 302 was at the end of the hall, one of the hotel's smallest rooms, with a view of the parking garage instead of the city skyline. Zariah hesitated, then knocked. Julian opened the door, his expression brightening when he saw her. He had changed into jeans and a t-shirt, looking more casual than she'd ever seen him. You came, he said, stepping back to let her in. The room was indeed small, a basic queen bed, a desk, a chair. Julian's laptop was open on the desk, papers spread around it. Working from a hotel room, she asked, noticing the spreadsheets on the screen. Trying to, he admitted. The Wi-Fi is slower than I'm used to. Zariah smiled despite herself. Roughing it, huh? Perspective, he reminded her with a smile of his own. Want to sit? The only places to sit were the desk chair and the bed. Zariah chose the chair, and Julian perched on the edge of the bed. I got your gift, she said. The photograph. Julian nodded. I wanted you to see her, to understand. She was beautiful, Zariah said softly. You must miss her. Every day, Julian agreed. But that's not why I'm here, Zariah. Then why are you here? In this hotel, in this tiny room? Julian leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. Because I wanted to know what it's like to live in your world even for a little while. Because I'm trying to show you that I see you, not a shadow of someone else, not a convenient date, but you. The intensity in his voice made Zariah's breath catch. Julian, I know you don't trust me, he continued. You have no reason to, but I'm asking for a chance to earn that trust. He hesitated, then added, I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night at the gala, about the life I've built, the walls I've put up, about what's real and what's just for show. And what have you concluded? Zariah asked quietly. That I've been hiding in plain sight for years, he said. In business suits and penthouse views and relationships that look good on paper. And then you came along, someone who doesn't care about any of that, and suddenly I couldn't hide anymore. His words resonated with something deep inside Zariah, a recognition of truth that was hard to dismiss. Still, she held back. What exactly are you asking for, Julian? A second chance, he said simply. Not a business arrangement, not a show for others, just a chance to get to know each other for real this time. Zariah looked at him, really looked at him. Not the millionaire, not the man trying to make his ex jealous, but the person sitting before her now. She saw vulnerability in his eyes, a genuine hope that made her own walls feel suddenly flimsy. I'm still not sure, she said honestly. Julian nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be in room 302 for the rest of the week. He smiled. Unless they kick me out for monopolizing the business center printer. That made Zariah laugh. The business center has 2 printers. Now you tell me, he groaned, and the moment of humor broke the tension between them. As Zariah stood to leave, Julian remained seated, giving her space. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad you came by. Me too, she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. At the door, she turned back. The showcase opens next Friday at the West Side Gallery. 7 o'clock, if you're interested. Julian's face lit up. I'll be there. For the next week and a half, Zariah and Julian developed a strange new routine. He continued to stay at the hotel, and she would occasionally stop by room 302 after her shift. They would talk, really talk, about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Julian told her about growing up with the pressure of family expectations, about his complicated relationship with his parents after Lily's death, about the emptiness of success without anyone to share it with. Zariah shared stories of her childhood, of learning to draw with second-hand art supplies, of her dreams to someday open a community art center for kids who, like her, couldn't afford formal lessons. You could do it, you know, Julian said one evening as they sat sharing takeout Chinese food in his room. With your talent and vision, you could make it happen. Maybe someday, Zariah replied. After I figure out how to pay my own bills first. Julian didn't offer to solve her problems with his money, which Zariah appreciated. Instead, he asked questions, offered perspectives, treated her dreams with respect rather than charity. Slowly, cautiously, Zariah felt herself beginning to trust him. Not the persona he showed the world, but the man beneath it. The man who laughed at her jokes, who listened intently when she spoke about her art, who was staying in a cramped hotel room just to understand her world better. The night before the showcase, Julian invited her to dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the hotel. Nothing fancy, just good food and conversation. Nervous about tomorrow, he asked as they shared a tiramisu. Terrified, Zariah admitted. What if no one likes my work? What if they all see I don't belong there? Julian reached across the table and took her hand. That won't happen. But even if it did, even if every critic in that room hated your paintings, it wouldn't change how good they are. It wouldn't change your talent. His confidence in her was both touching and unnerving. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen your work, he said simply. I've seen how you put yourself into every portrait, how you capture not just what people look like, but who they are. Zariah squeezed his hand. Thank you for believing in me. As they walked back to the hotel, Julian's hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining naturally. It felt right, this quiet connection between them. At the hotel entrance, they stopped. I should go home, Zariah said. Big day tomorrow. Julian nodded. Can I pick you up for the showcase? Zariah hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. For a moment they stood close, the air between them charged with possibility. Julian leaned forward slightly, then stopped, letting her decide. Zariah closed the distance, pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Julian responded with equal gentleness, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. When they pulled apart, his eyes were dark with emotion. Good night, Zariah. Good night, Julian. As she walked home, Zariah felt lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow was the showcase, a dream she'd had since childhood, finally coming true. And somehow, against all odds, she had found someone who seemed to truly see her, value her, choose her. Not a replacement, not a shadow, but her. What she didn't know was that the next day would test everything they had begun to build together, and that the truth, when fully revealed, would either destroy them or make them stronger than ever. The day of the art showcase arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies and a gentle breeze. Zariah had taken the day off work to prepare, spending hours getting ready both mentally and physically for what could be the most important night of her artistic career. Her mother came over in the afternoon to help, bringing the simple black dress they had splurged on together. You look beautiful, baby, her mother said, as Zariah twirled in front of the mirror. The dress was elegant without being flashy, perfect for an artist who wanted her work, not herself, to be the center of attention. Do you think people will like my paintings? Zariah asked, the nerves evident in her voice. Her mother took her hands. They'll love them because they're honest, because they show how you see the world. She paused, then added with a knowing smile, and how is your hotel guest doing? Zariah couldn't help the blush that rose to her cheeks. He's different than I thought. Her mother hummed, not pushing but clearly pleased. He's coming tonight? He said he would. Good. Her mother squeezed her hands. Now let's do something with this hair of yours. By 6 o'clock, Zariah was ready. Her hair was swept up in an elegant updo, her makeup subtle but polished. The gallery had arranged for her paintings to be picked up the day before, so all she needed to do was show up. Right on time, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, Julian stood there in a well-cut suit holding a small gift bag. His eyes widened appreciatively as he took in her appearance. You look stunning. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy. You clean up pretty well yourself. Julian smiled and handed her the gift bag. A little something for your big night. Inside was a slender silver bracelet with a small paintbrush charm. Simple, elegant, meaningful. Julian, it's beautiful, Zariah said as he helped her fasten it around her wrist. I wanted you to have something to remember tonight by, he explained. Whatever happens. Her mother appeared behind Zariah. You must be Julian. I've heard a lot about you. Julian extended his hand. Mrs. King, it's a pleasure to meet you. Take care of my baby tonight, she said, her voice warm but with an unmistakable note of warning. Yes, ma'am, Julian replied seriously. I promise. As they drove to the gallery in Julian's car, Zariah tried to control her nerves. What if no one buys my paintings? What if they think I don't belong there? Julian reached over and squeezed her hand. Then they're blind fools. But that's not going to happen. Your work speaks for itself, Zariah. The West Side Gallery was in the city's arts district, a modern building with gleaming glass walls. As they pulled up, Zariah saw that a small crowd had already gathered inside. Ready? Julian asked as he helped her from the car. Zariah took a deep breath, as I'll ever be. Inside, the gallery was elegantly lit, with each artist's work displayed in its own section. Harold Winters spotted Zariah immediately and came over to greet her. Miss King, so glad you could join us early. Your pieces are generating quite a buzz already. He led them to a corner of the gallery where Zariah's 4 portraits hung. Seeing them displayed professionally under perfect lighting took her breath away. They looked better than she had imagined. I'll leave you to it, Harold said. The doors open to the public in 20 minutes. As he walked away, Julian squeezed Zariah's hand. They're incredible. Zariah moved closer to her paintings, still not quite believing they were here, in a real gallery. The first was a portrait of an elderly man she'd met in the park, his weathered face telling the story of a life fully lived. The second captured a young street musician, his eyes closed in the ecstasy of his music. The third was of a little girl at the community center, where Zariah volunteered, her smile wide despite the difficulties of her life. And the fourth, the newest, was of her mother, strength and grace evident in every brushstroke. You see people, Julian said softly beside her. Really see them. Zariah turned to him, emotion welling in her chest. Thank you for helping make this happen. You did this, Julian insisted. All I did was pay a fee. The talent is all yours. Before she could respond, the gallery doors opened and people began to stream in. The evening became a whirlwind of introductions, conversations about technique and inspiration, and to Zariah's shock and delight, red sold dots appearing beside her paintings. Julian stayed close but not hovering, letting her have her moment while ensuring she always had a fresh glass of water and someone to turn to when she needed a break from the attention. Midway through the evening, Harold Winters approached with an elegantly dressed couple. Ms. King, I'd like you to meet Thomas and Eleanor Bradford. They own the Bradford Gallery chain. Zariah shook their hands, trying to hide her excitement. The Bradford Galleries were among the most prestigious in the country. Your work is remarkable, Eleanor said. So honest, so emotional. We are particularly interested in your portrait of the elderly gentleman. That's wisdom, Zariah explained. I met Mr. Jenkins in the park. He feeds the pigeons every day and tells stories to anyone who'll listen. You've captured something essential about aging, Thomas observed. Dignity amid decline. We'd like to discuss the possibility of featuring your work in our Emerging Artists Showcase next month. Zariah nearly dropped her water glass. That would be an honor. They exchanged information, promising to be in touch the following week. As they walked away, Zariah turned to Julian with wide eyes. Did that just happen? Julian beamed at her. It did, and it's just the beginning. The evening continued in a dreamlike haze. By 9 o'clock, all 4 of Zariah's paintings had sold, 1 to the Bradfords, 1 to a local collector, and 2 to anonymous buyers. We should celebrate, Julian said as the crowd began to thin. Dinner, champagne, whatever you want. Zariah nodded, still dazed by her success. Let me just thank Harold first. As she made her way across the gallery, she overheard a familiar voice. Vanessa Westover standing with a small group near the entrance. Julian certainly has eclectic taste these days, Vanessa was saying, her voice carrying just enough to reach Zariah's ears. First his charity date, now buying amateur art. I suppose he's going through some sort of phase. Zariah froze. Buying amateur art. She turned slowly, looking back at her display. All 4 paintings had sold. 1 to the Bradfords, 1 to a collector, and 2 to... A cold feeling spread through her chest. Had Julian bought her paintings? Was this whole evening just another elaborate show of his wealth and influence? She changed direction, walking quickly back to where Julian stood chatting with Harold Winters. Can I speak with you? She asked Julian, her voice tight. Privately. Sensing her mood, Julian excused himself and followed her to a quiet corner. What's wrong? He asked. Did you buy my paintings? Zariah demanded, keeping her voice low. Julian hesitated, and in that moment Zariah knew the answer. You did, didn't you? She pressed. The 2 anonymous purchases. That was you. Zariah, let me explain. Was any of this real? She asked, hurt and anger rising in her voice. The Bradfords, the other collectors, did you arrange all of this? Julian's expression was pained. No, the Bradfords are legitimate. So is the other buyer. But yes, I did purchase 2 of your paintings. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because they're brilliant, Julian said simply. Because I wanted them. Because I believe in your talent. Or because you wanted to make sure my showcase was a success, Zariah challenged. More charity for the poor girl from the wrong side of town. Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. That's not fair. I bought them because I love them. Because I love... He stopped abruptly. The unfinished sentence hung between them. Zariah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I need to go, she said, turning away. Zariah, please. Julian reached for her arm, but stopped short of touching her. Don't leave like this. Congratulations on your successful investment, she said coldly. I hope the paintings increase in value for you. Before he could respond, she walked away, stopping only briefly to thank Harold Winters for the opportunity before slipping out the gallery's side door. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, and the tears she'd been holding back finally fell. She'd been such a fool, believing that tonight was about her talent, that Julian's interest in her was genuine. It was all just another game to him, another way to play savior. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver her address, then sat in silence as the city lights blurred through her tears. The next morning, Zariah woke to the insistent ringing of her doorbell. She'd cried herself to sleep, and her eyes felt swollen and gritty. The ringing continued. With a groan, she pulled herself out of bed and shuffled to the door. Who is it? She called. It's me. Julian's voice replied. "Please, Zariah, 5 minutes." "Go away," she said, leaning her forehead against the door. "I will," he promised, "after 5 minutes, please." Something in his voice, a raw honesty she hadn't heard before, made her hesitate. Finally, she unlocked the door. Julian stood there, looking like he hadn't slept either. He was still in last night's clothes, his hair disheveled. "You have 5 minutes," she said, leaving the door open but walking back into her apartment. Julian followed, closing the door behind him. "I owe you an explanation. You seem to say that a lot," Zariah observed, crossing her arms. Julian nodded, accepting the criticism. "I do, because I keep making mistakes with you." He took a deep breath. "Yes, I bought 2 of your paintings, not because I felt sorry for you, not to ensure your success, but because I wanted them, because they move me." "Which ones?" Zariah asked, surprising herself with the question. "The portrait of your mother," Julian said, "because when I look at it, I see where your strength comes from. And the little girl from the community center, because it shows the kind of heart you have." Zariah wanted to hold on to her anger, but his sincerity was making it difficult. "You should have told me." "You're right," Julian agreed. "I should have, but I was afraid you'd react exactly as you did, that you'd think it was charity or manipulation." He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "I just wanted to support you without making you feel like you needed my support." Put that way, Zariah could almost understand his reasoning. Almost. "What about the Bradfords?" she asked. "Did you arrange that too?" "No," Julian said firmly. "I know Thomas through business, but I didn't know they'd be there last night. Their interest in your work is completely genuine." Zariah sank onto her sofa, suddenly tired. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Julian. Every time I start to trust you, something happens that makes me question everything." Julian remained standing, keeping his distance. "I know, and that's on me." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know." Zariah looked up, bracing herself for another revelation. "I'm giving up my penthouse," Julian said. "I've realized lately how empty that life is, how disconnected I've been from what matters." He paused. "I'm looking for a place in the arts district, something smaller, more real, and I've decided to start a foundation in Lily's name to fund art programs for underprivileged kids." Zariah stared at him, trying to process this unexpected turn. "Why are you telling me this?" Julian met her gaze. "Because you changed me, Zariah. Meeting you, seeing the world through your eyes, it woke me up. Made me realize I've been hiding in luxury, in business, in relationships that look good on paper but lack any real substance." The sincerity in his voice was impossible to dismiss. Zariah felt her defenses weakening. "Julian, your 5 minutes are up," he said, moving toward the door. "I promised I'd go, and I will. But I want you to know something first." He turned back to face her. "What I almost said last night at the gallery, it was true. I'm falling in love with you, Zariah King. Not because you remind me of someone else, not because you fit some image I had in my mind, but because of who you are. Your strength, your talent, your heart." The words hit Zariah like a physical force. She stood, her legs unsteady. "I don't expect you to say it back," Julian continued. "I don't even expect you to believe me right now. But it's the truth, the one truth that matters in all of this." He opened the door. "The paintings are yours. I'll have them delivered back to you. And if you ever want to talk about art, about life, about us, you know where to find me." He smiled sadly. Room 302, at least for another week. With that, he was gone, leaving Zariah standing alone in her apartment, his words echoing in her mind. "I'm falling in love with you." Was it possible? Could she trust it? Trust him? For the next week, Zariah threw herself into her work at the hotel and her art at home. The Bradfords had called, confirming their interest in featuring her in their showcase. Harold Winters had sold 2 more of her paintings that she'd hurriedly delivered to replace the ones that had been returned by Julian. Success was within her grasp, the artistic recognition she'd always dreamed of. And yet, something was missing. Every day at work, she found herself glancing toward room 302, wondering if Julian was there, if he was waiting for her. But pride kept her from checking, from reaching out. On Friday afternoon, Marcus sidled up to the concierge desk with a knowing look. "Lover boy checked out this morning." Zariah's heart sank despite herself. "Did he?" "Yep. Left a package for you with the front desk." Her hands trembled slightly as Marcus handed her a small envelope. Inside was a key card and a note. "If you ever want to see your paintings again, they're at this address. No pressure, no expectations. Just thought you might want to know where they are." Beneath his signature was an address in the Arts District. Zariah tucked the note into her pocket, her mind racing. Julian had moved and taken her paintings with him? After her shift, curiosity got the better of her. She found herself walking toward the address Julian had provided, the key card clutched in her hand. The building was a converted warehouse, nothing like Julian's sleek downtown high-rise. It had character, history, large windows that would let in plenty of natural light. Perfect for an artist. Zariah hesitated at the entrance, then used the key card to let herself in. The elevator took her to the top floor, where there was only one door. She knocked, but there was no answer. Taking a deep breath, she used the key card again. The space inside was open and airy, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors. It was sparsely furnished, as if the occupant had just moved in. But what caught Zariah's eye immediately were her paintings, both displayed prominently on the wall facing the entrance. She moved closer, studying them in this new setting. They looked good here, the lighting perfect, the space around them giving them room to breathe. "What do you think?" Zariah spun around to find Julian standing in the doorway to what appeared to be a kitchen. He was in jeans and a t-shirt, casual, approachable. "You moved," she stated the obvious. Julian nodded. "I told you I was looking for something in the arts district." He gestured around. "This feels more like home already." Zariah took in the space again, noticing details she'd missed before. A desk in the corner with Julian's laptop, a bookshelf half filled with books, large windows offering a view of the city that was different from his penthouse, but no less beautiful. "It suits you," she said finally. Julian smiled, a hint of relief in his expression. "I think so too." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else I want to show you." He led her to a door at the far end of the loft. When he opened it, Zariah gasped. Inside was a studio space, perfect for an artist. Large windows provided natural light, easels stood ready, and shelves lined one wall, filled with art supplies of every kind. "Julian, what is this?" He looked nervous, uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "It's a studio. For you, if you want it." Zariah turned to him confused. "I don't understand." "The loft has two separate living spaces," Julian explained. "This side and the side we just came from. They can be connected or completely separate, depending on what the occupants want." The implication of his words slowly dawned on Zariah. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "Not exactly," Julian said quickly. "I'm offering you a studio space, a place to work on your art without distractions, with the best light in the city." He gestured to the supplies. "Everything you need to create." "I can't afford a place like this," Zariah said, running her hand over a cabinet filled with paints in colors she'd never been able to buy for herself. "The building belongs to my company," Julian admitted. "But this isn't charity, Zariah. It's an investment in an artist I believe in. You can pay rent when your paintings start selling, which they already are." Zariah walked to the window, looking out at the view. It was tempting, so tempting. A space of her own designed for creating art, everything she'd ever dreamed of. "And what about you?" she asked, turning back to face Julian. "Where do you fit into this arrangement?" Julian's expression was open, vulnerable. "That's entirely up to you. The studio is yours regardless. The door between our spaces has a lock on both sides. You control your side." He paused. "I meant what I said, Zariah. I'm falling in love with you, but I don't expect anything in return. I just want to see you shine." Zariah studied him, searching for any sign of manipulation, any hint that this was another game. But all she saw was sincerity, hope, and a touch of fear, fear that she might walk away. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you do all this for me?" Julian moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Because from the moment I met you, you've been changing me, making me see what's real, what matters. You deserve this space, this opportunity. And selfishly, I want to be near you, even if it's just knowing you're creating something beautiful on the other side of that wall." The truth of his words was written across his face. This wasn't the calculating businessman who had hired her for the gala. This was a man who had stripped away his defenses, who was offering not just a studio, but his heart. "I need time to think," Zariah said honestly. Julian nodded. "Take all the time you need. The studio is yours, whether you use it or not." As she turned to leave, Julian called her name once more. "Zariah." She looked back. "Thank you for coming today, for giving me a chance to explain." His smile was gentle, patient. "Whatever you decide, I'm grateful for the truth you brought into my life." A month passed. Zariah's paintings had been featured in the Bradford Gallery showcase to critical acclaim. Offers were coming in, commissions, teaching opportunities. even a small grant to create a series focusing on community members in her old neighborhood. She had visited the studio several times, sometimes when Julian was there, sometimes when he wasn't. Gradually, she had begun to leave things behind: a sketchbook, a set of brushes, a half-finished canvas. Today, she stood in the middle of the space, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. It was perfect. Everything an artist could want. And on the other side of the wall was a man who had proven, day after day, that his feelings for her were real. Julian had been patient, respectful of her boundaries. When they did see each other, their conversations flowed easily, deeply. He asked about her work, her family, her dreams. He shared his own thoughts, vulnerabilities, hopes for the future. Slowly, cautiously, Zoraya had felt herself falling, not for the millionaire who had hired her for a night, but for the man who had stepped out of his world and into hers, the man who saw her, truly saw her. Making her decision, Zoraya picked up her phone and called her mother. "Mama, I need your help with something." 2 hours later, Zoraya stood in her apartment, looking at the finished canvas on her easel. It had taken weeks of work, stolen moments between shifts at the hotel and visits to the studio, but finally it was done. It was a portrait of Julian, not the polished businessman from the gala, but the man she had come to know. In the painting, he was smiling in a way he rarely showed the world, open, genuine, a little vulnerable. It was how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing. Carefully, she wrapped the canvas and took a taxi to the loft. Using her keycard, she let herself in, relieved to find the space empty. She propped the wrapped canvas against Julian's door and left a note. "If that's who I really am to you, come find me. This time, for real." She had just reached the street when her phone buzzed with a text. "I'm at the hotel, room 302. One last night, for old time's sake." Zoraya smiled, her heart racing as she hailed another taxi. 20 minutes later, she stood outside room 302, remembering the first time she had knocked on this door. Uncertain, defensive, hurt. Now she felt something different, something like hope. When Julian opened the door, his face lit up at the sight of her. He was in his casual clothes again, the businessman nowhere to be seen. "You came," he said, echoing his words from weeks ago. Zoraya stepped inside. The room was exactly as small and unremarkable as it had been before, except now it was filled with candles, their soft light casting a warm glow over everything. "What's all this?" she asked, turning to Julian. "I wanted to recreate our beginning," he explained, "but get it right this time. No arrangements, no pretending, just us." On the small table by the window, dinner was laid out. Nothing fancy, just takeout from the Italian restaurant they both liked. "Julian," Zoraya began, but he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, I want you to know I saw the painting." His eyes were full of emotion. "It's how you see me," Zoraya nodded. "It's who you are when you're with me, the real you." Julian moved closer, taking her hands in his. "And is that someone you could love?" The question hung between them, weighted with all that had come before. The night of pretense, the misunderstandings, the gradual building of trust. "I already do," Zoraya said softly. "I love the man who stayed in this tiny room to understand my world, who believes in my art, who isn't afraid to be real with me." Julian's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I love you, Zoraya King. The artist, the daughter, the woman who wouldn't let me hide behind my money or my name." When he kissed her, it was different from their first kiss. Deeper, surer, a promise rather than a question. "So," Julian said when they finally broke apart, "does this mean you'll accept the studio?" Zoraya laughed. "I've already moved in half my supplies." "And the door between our spaces?" he asked, his voice hopeful but not presuming. Zoraya looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had hired her for one night and ended up changing both their lives, at the man who had seen past her defenses to the dreams she kept hidden, at the man who had learned to be real with her and with himself. "I think," she said slowly, "that door might need to stay open." Julian's answering smile was everything: relief, joy, love. He pulled her close again, and as Zoraya melted into his embrace, she marveled at how life could change in unexpected ways. One night, one truth, and a love that had been real all along. 3 months later, the Westover Foundation held its winter gala. Julian and Zoraya arrived together. No pretense this time. Her artwork was featured in the silent auction, raising money for the new Lily Crestwood Art Foundation, which provided scholarships and supplies to young artists from underserved communities. As they circulated through the crowd, Julian's hand rarely left hers. When Vanessa approached, perfect as ever on the arm of her congressman fiancé, Zariah felt no tension, no insecurity. "Julian, Ms. King," Vanessa greeted them with practiced warmth. "Lovely to see you both again. Your foundation is doing remarkable work." "Thank you," Julian replied easily. "We're excited about the possibilities." "We?" Vanessa's eyebrow arched delicately. "Zariah is the creative director," Julian explained, his voice full of pride. "She knows firsthand what these programs can mean to young artists." As they continued to chat, Zariah felt Julian's arm slip around her waist, not for show, not to make anyone jealous, but simply because he wanted her close. Later, as they danced beneath the same chandeliers where their story had begun, Zariah rested her head against Julian's shoulder. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Very," she replied, "though I still can't believe how we started." Julian chuckled. "One night of pretending led to a lifetime of truth." "A lifetime?" Zariah teased, pulling back to look at him. Julian's eyes were serious despite his smile. "If you'll have me." And in that moment, surrounded by the glitter and glamour that had once seemed so foreign to her, Zariah knew with absolute certainty that what they had built together was real. Not a fantasy, not a business arrangement, but something true and lasting. "I will," she whispered, and sealed the promise with a kiss. Around them, the gala continued, music playing, champagne flowing, conversations humming, but Zariah and Julian were in a world of their own, a world they had created together, one truth at a time. One night had changed everything, but it was the mornings, afternoons, and evenings that followed, filled with honesty, understanding, and love, that had made their story real. The end.